Hello and welcome back to the Building HVAC Science Podcast. I've worked in the HVAC and building science markets for about 30 years. In the process, just continue to be fascinated and intrigued with making measurements. So Eric, Kaiser, and I were thinking about what's next? What's another good podcast topic? So it's what we measure and why. And I'll just let you branch into this podcast. Duocast, we called it, where Eric and I discuss the things we measure in and around our homes and why. So let's just get at it. And you can hear about home monitoring madness, tracking energy, air, and more with Bill and ELK. Hey folks, welcome back to Building HVAC Science. Today, this will be, some people call them solo casts or something like that. So this will be a duocast, just Eric and I. Good morning, Eric.
Morning, Bill. Duocast. I like that.
Duocast. Sounds like something a really avid person who fishes would use.
That could be. I don't know. But wouldn't duocast be like two lines going out at the same time?
Sure. More efficient.
More tangles, too, potentially.
Depends. An engineer would figure this out. Do you know any engineers?
I do. Is that what you're going to do in retirement?
I don't know. It's just a big blank slate right now.
They say if you build a better mousetrap, they'll beat a path to your door. If you build a better fishing method, will they build a river to your door?
Yeah, they'll probably flood my yard. So, Eric, this podcast we did yesterday sent you off to make measurements using field tools in your own house. What's that all about?
It did. So we recorded an episode with Gary Klein on energy efficiency and got to talking about hot water. And I mentioned about the system that I have in my house for hot water, a domestic hot water distribution. And Gary's really interested in it. And because apparently mine is operating in a way that he hasn't seen others be able to operate. So now I went down a data logging rabbit hole on some new things and set up a data log of some temperatures. And I'm sure we're going to have Gary on again in the future to discuss that, the results of that. So it'll be interesting.
So you use pipe clamp probes?
Yeah, with some water temperatures. So I'm monitoring inlet and outlet water temperature. Along with, we're going to correlate this to another thing that I monitor in my house, which is electricity and electricity usage. I think you're the one that turned me on to the Emporia Vue, perhaps.
I think I picked that up from a group I was following that Nate Adams and Ted Kidd were in. Or I threw it out there to Facebook friends, said, what's a good energy monitor? As we moved into an all-electric home, I really want to understand what all the systems consume and why. And I picked up on the Emporia Vue, connected it up, and we moved in October of 2020, connected it like right before Christmas. It was a gift to myself. Connected it right before Christmas, and just as soon as I connected it up, 2 days later, I'm looking at the consumption going, what the heck? This heat pump, it's like 3 times the consumption I expected it to be. Now, what does that hint at, Eric?
Hint. I don't know. I'm going to take a guess here and say that, were you monitoring indoor consumption or outdoor consumption?
I was monitoring the outdoor unit. I monitor the indoor unit for the fan and the strip heat, and I monitor the outdoor unit. So there was the air handler / strip heat, which was the large signature there.
There was the large load. So that would tell me that you have backup heat or some supplemental heat coming on and causing a high energy usage. You've got a high kilowatt draw.
And it ended up being, when the system went from air conditioning to heat pump mode, a faulty installation, a leaky flare, cracked flare caused the system to leak refrigerant. And I had no heat pump running, so it switched over to backup.
That's not a good thing.
That was an important investment right there. I don't know if I ever would have noticed it. I think after a while I might have, but if I didn't monitor the electrical consumption, how long would it have taken me to notice that?
Probably wouldn't have noticed it nearly as quickly until you got your energy bill. So you have an all-electric house, but you also have grid-tie solar there, correct?
Right.
Which means that you probably would have seen your electrical usage bill come in and gone, why am I using so much energy off the grid? Why is my solar not keeping up with this?
Although it was like the first winter month, in a brand new house. And maybe that's the fingerprint. Maybe that's normal. Maybe that's natural. So again, invaluable, less than $200. One other thing I discovered with it, and this came up when I was giving a presentation at the Pennsylvania Housing Research Center conference, and I was talking about my house, and I showed a pie graph of all the different loads and consumption there, and never struck me, but somebody said, "Hey, what's that big thing called septic there?" I'm like, "Oh, you're right. That's quite a bit of consumption. It's 0.5 megawatt a year, and that's for the pump that runs on a half-duty cycle, on 30 minutes, off 30 minutes, on 30 minutes, 24/7, 365.
That's your stir pump for the septic tank to keep it from turning into a block of solid sludge, because you want to keep that liquid sludge.
Right. Tasty. So I didn't realize that. And then afterwards, another discovery. So we want to talk about what we measure and why. So I'm just talking about the things I discovered. The other thing I discovered was when I had to install a radon fan, and I'll tell you what measurement led me to do that. Immediately after I switched that on, I saw consumption go up, and it's projected at 0.5 megawatt a year for this radon fan.
Wow. 0.5 megawatt a year, huh?
0.5 megawatt hour, I should say. Let me say, use the correct units. 0.5 megawatt hour.
I was like, that's a lot of electricity.
Yeah, all at once, right? Instantaneous, man. You can see my house from space. It glows.
That radon fan just blew the space station out of orbit.
How about your electrical monitoring experience? Why did you do it? And
I wanted to be able to experiment. I really started it off just wanting to understand the loads in my house, wanting to better understand what was being utilized in my house. And I learned something really interesting. And I've been monitoring for, and I'd have to go back and look and see how many years now. I wonder if I can tell here.
that's the other nice thing about a lot of these products we're talking about is the apps, the accessibility of data, the ability to visualize things and really pull trends out.
So I can go back to 2022 as a full year. So I've got several years worth of data now. I think I've been in there monitoring it longer than that, but it only stores so much because it's a lot of data. But one of the things I found out was that my blower motor in my furnace, my gas furnace, is the highest electrical usage in my house because I run it constantly for circulation in the house. It's an older furnace with a PSC motor in it, and that uses around 30% of the electrical consumption. That accounts for around 30% of the electrical consumption in my house all year long, which was eye-opening to me. And when I go ahead and I'm going to switch into an ECM motor at some point in time. And I'm interested to see how much that changes the consumption on that. It was very interesting to me to see that the air conditioner in my house, which is oversized, actually accounts for 5 or 6% of the total consumption in a year's time.
Sure. Cooling, just not a huge cooling load.
Yeah, not a huge cooling load. If we ran it all year long, and I'm going to switch to a heat pump, so I expect that will be changing quite a bit. My dehumidifier actually accounts for double the energy usage that my air conditioner does.
Wow. So stepping back a couple minutes here, I mentioned I found that the radon fan consumes 0.5 megawatt hour a year. And the reason I put it in was I took part in a study called ROCIS, ROCIS, which stands for Reduction of Outdoor Contaminants in Indoor Spaces, ROCIS.org. It's a project, a program run under an endowment. It was run by Linda Wigington, who is one of the founders of the Affordable Comfort Conference, which became the National Home Performance Conference. And she does a little training and hands out 9 different indoor air quality monitors to citizens, and we call it citizen science, who will pledge to collect data of their activities, what's happening inside and outside in a little diary, and take measurements from these different devices. And one of them was a radon meter. And I took part in the study 3 times. And anybody listening, I think they take people like out of the Pittsburgh area. And I know they have done that on occasion. So you should take it rocis.org. And you can look at also the studies. But basically, it was to see what from outside leaks inside because we talk about the concentration of outdoor pollutants in inside spaces, especially if you don't have good ventilation and filtration. Anyway, found out I had high levels of radon in the house I was living in. The house we built, we intended it would have a passive radon reduction system, which is basically like a French drain around the inside footer in the basement to collect the soil gas, and then just a stack running straight up. And just by stack effect, it should, but it didn't, pull the radon, the soil gases out. So I had to put a fan in, but we had thought ahead and put a provision in for a place to put the fan in. So another monitor led me to put in another device, which led me to monitor it. Do you see a pattern here, Eric? Is this like a devilish pattern?
I think it's a self-expanding thing.
Here you go.
You figure one thing out and you're like, oh, I need to look at something else. Oh, I need to look at something else. It's, dare I say, a rabbit hole?
Yeah.
Or a rabbit hole inside of a squirrel hole or something like that.
But be careful of the radon in the hole in the ground.
You want to have a fan in there to get the radon out as you're going down that hole.
So that engagement with that project led me to look at, for TrueTech, radon monitors. And the ones that we used in the project were Corentium from Norway, which has evolved into Airthings. And now we resell Airthings monitors for radon plus more. Do you have any Airthings going in your place?
I have a number of Airthings in my place. I've got 4 different Airthings in my house right now. So I have a Vue Plus in my bedroom, in the main bedroom. I've got a Plus, the Wave Plus in the guest bedroom. And then I've got a couple of minis. And the minis are pretty neat because they're just temperature, humidity, and VOCs. And what I do with the minis is the main monitor, of course, is in the living spaces that we're looking at, where I'm breathing the air, where other people are breathing the air. So I'm watching that. But then I use the minis to look at remote places, like all the way up at the peak of the roof, or I'll watch the attic, or I'll watch the basement. And I can move them around. I can throw them in the crawl space. And I've got a couple of them around the house. And I watch different areas of the house to see how things change between different levels of the house. And that's been really interesting to watch, for instance, how humidity gathers up in the peak of a roof, because I have a high vaulted ceiling in part of my house, and how the humidity, not only the hot air, because the air conditioning will circulate some of that around up top there, but the humidity will gather up in there because humid air, of course, is lighter. So it's often higher up at the peak of that, which, of course, we have to watch out depending on what kind of insulation and things like that.
Surface temperatures, huh?
Well, surface temperatures, yeah, you've got to watch that. But say if you have a house with open cell insulation up against the roof deck or something like that. I have insulation up against my roof deck spray foam, but mine's closed cell, so I don't get that ping pong effect in there. I want to keep the roof deck solid. I watch that up there just to see what happens. And one of the things that Airthings built in is actually, that I found really interesting, is actually a mold risk indicator. And they're looking at relative humidity and temperature in that case. They have an algorithm that they've built based on several commonly known factors about when mold starts growing in different areas. So if you put that mini in there, and it will assess the mold risk in that given area. So it's really interesting for monitoring things like that, and that I really like it for.
I'm going to put a link in the show notes. I think Allison Bales, the Energy Vanguard, did a little article on the ping pong effect, or at least one, probably a couple, because that's where I heard about it first. So anybody who wants to delve into that a little bit further.
I think that originated with Joe Stiebrick, and I know he's got a paper on it as well. So maybe we can link that in the show notes too.
I'll source that too. Thank you. Again, going back to where the conversation started, and you were measuring water temperatures for water heating, domestic water heating?
Domestic water heating for that.
I've thought about, and this, I'm going to jump around like future, thought about like a water flow detector with a valve, with a shutoff valve in it. So if we weren't paying attention and a pipe burst somewhere, that it would detect excessive flow and shut down. You familiar with any of those? Or I think some of those are just coming out. I've seen a couple.
I've seen several of them come out. They've really popularized over the past couple of years. with a lot of the connected devices. In fact, unless I missed my guess, Emporia may actually have one now, but I'm not 100% certain on that.
I haven't seen one. I know they just came out with a Tesla or NACS compatible charger EV, just announced like yesterday.
Gotcha. Okay.
If you're looking for one, again, we don't get anything from doing this, but I know the owner, he's on the podcast, the owner of Emporia Energy, and great man, Sean McLaughlin. It's a great price, $399 for a Tesla EVSE, as well as the CCS type, which I have one of those.
Gotcha.
Which brings me back to another monitoring point. I can actually monitor and control the EV charger in the same app as the Emporia. It reports into, through Wi-Fi, it reports into the same console in the app. So I can see separate usage of the vehicle versus the main home, as well as any of the circuits I have connected.
That's neat. So you can track what's going where and figure out if you have overusage, like your heat pump and heating issue, versus something else in the house if it's drawing more energy than what you expect it should.
There's something I mentioned there was, it's nice the way the Emporia EVSE melds with the Emporia data for the rest of the house. And then basically another device shuffling the deck and bringing the data together. I just, as in last week, plugged in something, really just plugged it in, called a home assistant. Have you heard of those?
Mm-mm.
Oh, okay. Basically, they'll read every smart device. And I'm going to be really, somebody out there who knows about this is probably screaming, shut off the podcast, pull their headphones out, stomping on the ground. So I'm going to do a very poor job explaining this, but it's a little device based on Raspberry Pi that reads the data from home smart devices and allows you to mix the data and to trigger events. I'll just say it just as simply as that. Right now, I just have a few things connected. I'm really not even an amateur, just an experimenter with it. It was something Ben Reed had mentioned to me. He said, "Oh, you're going to like this." So of course I went out and bought one like last fall, and then finally, and didn't plug it in. Literally, it was just plugging it in so far. And it's already started to pick up signals of devices. And interesting thing is it picked up our ceiling fan, which has a Wi-Fi control to it. It just reads about everything. It's one of those open source projects, Home Assistant.
Interesting. Yeah, I was just actually looking here in another window at the Emporia Vue, and they're actually on version 3 now, which I think you and I are still on version 1.
I think I have 2.
Oh, you have 2 now. Okay. Well, I'm still on version 1 of the Emporia Vue, which I think I have to upgrade because I'm looking at this and I'm going, I need some new stuff.
Yeah, new stuff.
Darn new stuff.
You didn't say, but I'm going to guess that you have the Airthings and the master and the main bedroom because you're monitoring CO2. Is that correct?
I'm watching CO2. I'm watching radon. I actually have a little bit of a radon problem in my house that I need to address, but we've got to do some pretty major things to address that in our house, unfortunately. So it's just watching it right now. But it's interesting how much that changes with conditions. It is definitely not a stable number.
Oh, no. Radon isn't a static measurement like the square footage of your house.
It led me to understand a little bit more about radon testing. And I see a lot of the testing that we get done is maybe a 24-hour monitor or something like that, or somebody puts something in there for 24 or 48 hours. And basically it's a little sheet. It's a really thin little piece of plastic. And they actually go in there with a microscope and count the holes in it that the radon gas actually punctures. And
I think it's the alpha particles that are released through the decay. They punch holes in it.
Yeah. And then they go in there and count those holes. If you are on a really low, because it can go really low for days or even weeks at a time. And then you can have a really high spike for quite a period of time. And that's really intrigued me about a lot of the radon testing that gets done in the United States, which is a really short test time. And people base their house decisions off of that. If you're buying a house and a radon test is required, it's okay, are we at a peak or are we at a really low time? We have no idea because we don't have a long-term test in there. And that's something I think that needs to be really long-term tested in houses.
I want to say in Europe, it's like 7 days.
7 days?
I'll put in the show notes a link to an Airthings article. They have some really good consumer-facing articles on that topic. And then the other thing is being an amateur at radon, but I'll just say it seems like the soil porosity makes a difference. In other words, if the ground is frozen or wet, it's less porous to soil gases, which would then drive them to follow the path of least resistance, which could be through your crawl space or basement because it's protected, dry, not frozen, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
You see any correlation there?
I haven't correlated it that deeply.
So that's going to bring me to my next topic. You need an outdoor weather monitor, Eric.
Bill, you've been a really bad influence on my home monitoring budget.
Can you block this episode from Rachel listening to it? Because I don't want her to know that I'm the one that is feeding these desires in you to monitor.
I'll just get an eye roll and she's like, yeah, okay, there's something else stuck in our house again.
So this one I got because it gets windy up at our house site. And I was wondering, would it ever be appropriate for a near ground wind generator, windmill, wind turbine? There's some that are being experimented with now that are like horizontal or vertical scoops and cups and things like that are not just like big blades just to make a difference. So
there's some out there that genuinely look like an art project.
Yes, they're more beautiful than functional.
They are.
And no one says that about me, by the way. I'm pretty functional.
They don't say that about me either. But there's some of them out there that are just really cool looking. And I'm like, is that going to work? But some of them, I think, there was one I saw, what was it called? An Archimedes or something like that. It looks like
Archimedes spiral, probably.
Yeah, it looks like a giant corkscrew out of something that you would see in a cartoon, like a cartoon tunneling machine. And I don't know, I would put that on top of my house just to make people fall out of their cars while driving past looking at it.
So I wanted to characterize the wind speed up here and actually get measurements. So I found a device called a Tempest, Tempest, and I put it out away from the house so it's out of any wind shielding. So it's up about 10 feet in the air on one of the posts in my garden. And it measures temperature, measures its own battery voltage because it recharges with a little panel on top, measures barometric pressure, measures lightning strikes and distance away. It measures wind speed and direction. It measures rainfall, UV, and it will also calculate wet bulb globe temperature, delta T, and air density.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot of stuff in a little package.
It is. Some of it is sensors are so fantastic today, and that's probably the only reason we're having this conversation is because there's so many great sensors out there that the people are building into products, integrating into products.
And weather is fascinating. And you showed me that Tempest weather station a while back, and that's something else that I have been meaning to purchase to stick on the outside of my house. And that one really intrigues me, mostly because of the method by which it monitors rainfall. So I've looked at a lot of weather stations, and they typically use a cup that captures the rainfall and then dumps it out or has a valve in it or something like that. And I've always thought, man, that would just get clogged up or potential to have problems. And that Tempest doesn't do that. It has if I remember right, it has an ultrasonic monitoring system on top.
Ultrasonic is for the wind speed and direction. It's a haptic sensor.
Oh, okay.
Which is touch or something touch related. Along the top, it's a little dome. From the top, it's not the size, maybe the size of a softball. And it's got a dome on it, which includes the solar cell, the haptic sensors. And then underneath that little roof is a little porch area where there's 4 ultrasonic sensors, if I recall correctly, because I haven't gone up there and looked, that measure wind speed and direction through using ultrasonics.
That's cool. I'm going to have to spend some money soon.
The other thing I mentioned, UV. So it also measures solar. Let's see, I get this right. Yeah, I could look at solar radiation in watts per square meter. And I have solar panels, as some people listening to this probably know. That's of interest to me to have I could look at the output from the solar panels. That's the other thing. The inverters provide output data individually and in aggregate. and over time. And this is through a website, but you can get it through a web app. So I get to see all that. And the other thing I have out there is a good old analog power meter, power production meter at the array. And the reason I have that is because in Pennsylvania, and that's one of 7 states, because I produce renewable energy and either I use it or I put it back on the grid, I get credit, or it's a commodity that can be traded to utilities who have a legal requirement to show so much production by renewable sources. So it's called a solar renewable energy credit. And because of that power production meter, I'm on a list of power plants for the state of Pennsylvania. And I report monthly to a third party who validates my claim as to how many megawatt hours are produced. And then they trade it on the market to a utility who has to show that so many megawatt hours were produced from renewable sources. It's a cost avoidance for them. Instead of them putting in solar, they'll take credit for my solar.
And that's a really cool thing. And unfortunately, that's going away in a lot of areas.
Yeah, net metering and energy credits and things like that are changing. That's part of the reason, and I'm just a little digression, I got involved with Solar United Neighbors, which is a nonprofit that's for people getting solar. Help them decide on solar, help them decide on EV chargers, home batteries. They don't tell you what to do, but they tell you they have resources on how to do it. And they also offer co-ops. So if anybody out there, and they have, I think, around 20 states now. So if you look up Solar United Neighbors, you may find one in your state. And then if you go to the tab for your state, it will tell you about what's going on in your state. So like you said, going away in some places, they keep track of what's happening in different locales, different states.
Neat.
Yeah. The other, you mentioned Airthings, and I throw in there CO2. We also measure CO2 with our ERV, our serve conditioning ERV. And I use the internal CO2 sensor to tell it when to run. So it runs like once an hour for a short period of time, samples the air in the house. And if the CO2 level's above 800, it runs until it drops it down. And then it will turn off. So instead of running ventilation on a schedule, it runs it on more demand using CO2 as an indicator of air freshness.
Interesting. I like that. I mean, that's a much more energy efficient way of doing things for certain. Because if you don't need it, if there's nobody in the house or the area that's producing CO2 or needs the fresh air, why bring it in?
Absolutely. And I forgot, I don't know if you have one of these, but I picked this up again from Allison Bales, Aeronet 4. Eric's reaching for his. I'm reaching for mine.
Yep. Little Aeronet 4.
We're showing off baseball cards or something.
It's a club.
What's your number?
Right now, 888.
Okay. Mine's 739. I have a remote switch I can turn on my serve to run that number down, help bring in some fresh air. So
I use that out here in my office because I don't have one of the Airthings in my office at the moment. I haven't put one in my office, but this is a nice just proxy to tell me how well the ERV, because I have a ceiling mounted ERV in my office, one of the little spot ERVs, and it does pretty good. I need to get a little bit more volume through there, I think, but it's not doing too bad.
So now I'm going to get personal.
Uh-oh.
If you didn't think we were there already. You have a fitness watch, Apple Watch, something like that?
Oh, yeah.
If you don't mind saying, what do you monitor on that?
Well, I'll say it monitors a lot of things. There's some things I pay attention to on it and some things I don't. And that's one of those things I wish that they would allow more customization for the fitness app on it, because I don't like the way they're like, we want a set amount of exercise all day. But I do watch my exercise. One of the things I really watch is my stand numbers, because it tells you how to stand. Now, if you're a little inventive, you can figure out how to fake that out really easily.
I may be laying down and I'll stretch and go like, congratulations, you just stood up. I'm like, no, I didn't. And I wasn't trying to fake it out, but I'm thinking like, that's not a reliable number.
Yeah, it's not super reliable because it literally just relies on the angle that the watch is sitting in. So if I'm driving a lot one day, or if I'm flying on an airplane and it's buzzing at me and I'm like, oh, I can just stick my arm straight down next to my side and look at that. I got a stand number.
I use it for walking distance. And sometimes I look at heart rate. And speaking of heart rate, I bought another monitor. Again, I'm addicted to this. It's called a Cardia monitor. You ever see those? It's a little device, very small device, that you touch to like your fingers and your ankle or something. You touch the back of it to your ankle and then your two fingers, and it gives you a 6-lead EKG that I want to say has some validity to it. It's been tested for validity.
That's actually spelled Kardia.
Yes, Kardia.
I just looked that up in case anybody looks that up. That's not what I considered for off the top of my head spelling. Interesting. That's pretty neat. I have an Apple Watch and I like a lot of things about it. I use it to track outdoor exercise, like if I'm running or walking or something like that, I'll use it to track distance. I use it to track swimming and fitness training because I've done a thing the past 2 years, 23 and 24, with two friends from the industry, Chris Hughes and Chad Simpson, we've done a half Ironman triathlon relay team. And I swim, Chad bikes, and Chris runs. And that's a whole lot of fun, but I don't have time. I think it would be neat to do the full race myself, but I don't have time to train for that. That's a serious time commitment to train in 3 disciplines. So we split it up. We each train one discipline and have a lot of fun doing it. So I do use my Apple Watch for that. I've been pleasantly surprised how durable those are. I was really worried about, I'm going to scratch it. I'm going to beat it up. I'm going to break the lens on it. And nothing so far.
Nice.
I don't even have a scratch on the lens.
I got a new measurement device yesterday, much to my wife's chagrin.
What am I buying now? Tell me, Bill.
It was a Bluetooth meat probe, so I could monitor things on the grill without having to hover over it.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah. So I haven't tried it out yet. It's got a funny name, Meter, Meater.
A meter. I love it. That is hilarious.
So I haven't tried that one out yet, but perfect my cooking by using measurements, I guess. So.
That's neat. Okay, so I'm looking at this meter right now, and that is tiny.
Yeah.
I've looked at some of these Bluetooth devices before, and there's either like a lead in the transmitters outside of the grill. They're big. I've always worried about like damage on them. That one fits in some small spaces.
And you can, of course, use it indoors too. So that's interesting.
What else do you monitor in your house? Because I know I've got a couple other monitors in my house.
I've got one more I had on my quick list. One goes back to Emporia Vue. They also have outlet monitors, so you can measure individual devices, plug-in devices, but you can also use them to control. And so I use that for the vacation lighting in the house and put it on a random schedule.
Mm-hmm.
But I also have some Wyze products, WYZE, Wyze cameras. In a way, it's monitoring. It's more just curiosity and property surveillance. But what do you got going there?
I've also got some cameras, but I use the Eufy brand, and I think I've been pretty happy with that. But I also use the Haven device.
Oh, right. I forgot that. I had that on the list, but scribbled over it. It was too tiny a piece of paper. I warned you.
Bill's writing on tiny Post-it notes here, and he figured out that he's got more monitors than that poor little tiny piece of paper can hold on to.
Tell me about your Haven.
The Haven indoor air quality monitor I've used for quite a while now. I think I've got one of the original ones still. And I don't look at it a ton, but it's one of those things where it's there if I want to look at it. Haven has moved into more of an automation process now, and they have a remote relay, which I'm really interested to start using because it can do more of that control like your Serve does with doing on-demand ventilation. It will actually integrate with some other things now. Don't have the list off the top of my head. But being able to do demand ventilation and demand dehumidification a little bit differently, maybe some pressure balancing in the house. If you turn on an exhaust fan, that turns on an air intake fan to try to help pressure balance the structure. That I'm really interested in to cut down on mechanically air-driven infiltration.
So would you say it allows you to, it's good for a retrofit scenario? my case, I bought a Serve, which was a packaged unit.
Yeah.
But a Haven could allow you in a retrofit scenario or an upgrade scenario to install a control and then use it to control devices and make, I don't want to call them dumb, but less smart devices smart.
I'll say less connected devices.
Less connected. There you go. Better terminology.
When we start, oftentimes in an HVAC system, we have a lot of different monitoring points, but they're standalone. Like all they do is talk to them. They keep it all internally. They don't want to talk to anything else. And because the house and the HVAC system are so connected, we really need to be tying all these monitoring points together to be able to make decisions off of them. And the better we can connect that stuff, I think the better decisions we can make in a house.
And turn the decisions over to automation.
Yeah, automate the decisions. As a homeowner, I don't want to have to be standing there looking at my phone constantly or getting notifications like, hey, your CO2's high, go turn on your ventilation fans. No, I want that automated. I want to set it and forget it, maybe get an alert if something's going excessively high that would tell me maybe this fan is quit working. But other than that, the operation, daily operation, I want it automated. I don't want to be bothered with that, I guess.
We probably talked about this. I know I talked about this with the other Eric at TrueTech, Eric Preston, but it's the IAQ is you can monitor to collect data and then do something active to address the situation if there is one. And I just say something active. Doesn't have to be a device, could just be opening the windows, like you said, and then monitor the result to see if you've achieved the goal. That's the wraparound thinking that I have of IAQ, indoor air quality.
And that's the thing where automation can really help with those things because they can look and say, hey, okay, we took this action. Is that making it better or is it making it worse? If there's high, we'll say particulate matter inside the air and we want to turn on the fan for ventilation or not ventilation, but for filtration purposes, or maybe we open up an outdoor air to bring in ventilation air. We open up an outdoor air damper, we turn on a fan, it brings in outdoor air, and it makes the CO2 levels or it makes the dust levels or whatever rise in the house immediately after that. That device then can say, hey, this is not solving the problem. We got something else going on. I need to turn that outdoor air off because it's either not solving the problem that I thought I was solving or it's creating other problems. And then we need to send an alert to the occupants.
And it's also the ability to choose those rails where you do send an alert, which allows you to fine tune the decision making. So,
yeah.
The other thing I measure here is time.
And we're out of it.
And we're out of it. I really enjoyed this. I hope our listeners enjoyed this. I will try to put links to a lot of these products in there. If I don't, just reach out and contact us. Kaiser, Kaiser, TrueTechTools.com or Bill at TrueTechTools.com. And we'll tell you what we know, or at least what we think we know.
Absolutely. I'll share anything I think I know. Okay, almost anything.
Thank you, Al.
Thanks, Bill.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Building HVAC Science Podcast. We hope this was informative and perhaps even entertaining. I did try to put together a fairly comprehensive list of all the things we talked about in this podcast. If we missed some, our email addresses are in the show notes for you to go ahead and reach out to us if you're wondering about what we were talking about, and maybe we'll remember by the time you contact us. Okay, well, thanks for listening to the Building HVAC Science Podcast. It's a production of TrueTech Tools Limited. In full disclosure, I'm a co-owner of TrueTech, and Eric Kaiser is a employee. And those opinions voiced are those of my guest, my co-host, in this case, just myself and my co-host for this podcast, depending on who's speaking, of course. And if you're in the market for any tools or test instruments, including some in the links are actually things we use for measurement or things we sell at TrueTech, you can look at TrueTechTools.com, TrueTechTools.com, and use the offer code HVACBS for a nice discount. I want to thank you for listening to and following us in Building HVAC Science. Spread the word. We do some really interesting stuff, as people tell us, and can bring you some enlightenment to your day, perhaps. So Thanks again for listening, and again, spread the word. We thank you for listening to the Building HVAC Science Podcast. Take care.